Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be reviewing the many adaptations of the Alex Cross books. Now, I have made a video discussing my very brief and very basic thoughts on the book series as a whole, so you can check that out if you want to first. And in this video, I'm going to be discussing all 3 feature film adaptations that have been made so far. That being the 2 Morgan Freeman films, Kiss the Girls and Along Came a Spider, and the Tyler Perry film, Alex Cross. And don't worry, if you haven't seen any of these films or read the books, there's not going to be any spoilers here. So with that out the way, let's begin. So Kiss the Girls was the first ever attempt to adapt an Alex Cross novel, and it was based on the second book in the series of the same name. It was directed by Gary Flater and stars the likes of Ashley Judd, Cary Elwes, Tony Goldwyn, Brian Cox, Bill Nunn, and of course Morgan Freeman as Alex Cross. It follows Alex Cross as he is in pursuit of Casanova, a serial killer who specifically targets young women. Comparing this to the novel, I actually think it was a pretty good adaptation through and through. And even on its own, it's a great film, especially if you're a fan of classic 90s crime thrillers. I wouldn't say it's as good as the book. The book is perfect in my opinion, but this movie comes extremely close. So first of all, I really enjoyed the performances in this film, especially that of Morgan Freeman. Sure, he lacks the physique of the character, and he isn't exactly the right age either, but Morgan Freeman's charisma is more than enough to make you overlook that. And whoever voiced Casanova when his identity was still a mystery, props to them because they did a good job at making him scary.
Kiss me.
I also liked the direction of the film. You know, it was presented as this sort of neo-noir psychological thriller reminiscent of films like The Silence of the Lambs and of course Seven. You can feel the influence of those films here, but it still does enough to stand on its own. There's a couple of noteworthy creative liberties taken with the source material. You know, the introduction to Alex Cross as a detective and as a character is unlike anything the books have ever done, and it makes for a pretty solid first impression. And even the climax was tweaked to be a bit more creative. Plus, Kate McTiernan, that being Ashley Judd's character, was way ahead of her time in my opinion. You know, she's a survivor of Casanova who aids Alex Cross in his efforts to bring him down, which essentially makes her a survivor of sexual assaults. And given that Ashley Judd in real life did serve as somewhat of a whistleblower on the whole Harvey Weinstein thing, yeah, I don't think it's too far off. I guess the only downside to this film is that a couple of subplots from the book had to be cut. I'm not saying they all had to be kept in, otherwise the movie would have gone on forever, but maybe 1 or 2 of them, or maybe just 1 or 2 characters from these subplots could have stuck around. And maybe it could have made the whole experience a tad bit more cohesive. But that's just a small thing. Overall, I really enjoyed this film. I think it's a great adaptation of the book of the same name, and I think it's a great example of a neo-noir thriller straight out of the 90s. And definitely one of Morgan Freeman's best films, period. And so for that, I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. The next film is Along Came a Spider, which is an adaptation of the very first Alex Cross book of the same name, and serves as a direct sequel to Kiss the Girls. It was directed by Lee Tamahori and sees Morgan Freeman once again returning to reprise his role. In this film, a man by the name of Gary Sinise has kidnapped the daughter of a US senator and is demanding a ransom in exchange for her safety. But Alex isn't walking alone this time, as we see him teaming up with Secret Service agent Jesse Flanagan. So much like Kiss the Girls, I really enjoyed Along Came a Spider, although I don't think it's quite as good as Kiss the Girls, nor do I think it's as good as its source material. There is a lot to like here though, namely the performances. You know, I thought Monica Pato was great as Jesse Flanagan, and Michael Wincott was perfectly cast as Gary Sinise. You know, this guy has appeared in several films and TV shows like The Crow, Alien Resurrection, 24 Live Another Day, and most recently, Nope. There's plenty of memorable sequences, such as the initial kidnapping, the computer scene, the Russian embassy sequence, and of course the climax. The film admittedly changes several key elements from the book, but it still has a cohesive, compelling narrative of its own to keep you intrigued, especially if you've never read the book. And I did like Alex Cross's character arc in the film. You know, he believes he should be walking solo because whenever he does take on a partner, something bad happens to them. And so it does make him somewhat overly protective of Jesse Flanagan. However, ultimately, the book told this story way better. You know, there's a lot of great sequences that were ultimately cut from the film script. Some changes were made as well, some faring better than others. And even without comparing it to the book, there's a couple of logic issues and implausibilities that will no doubt leave you scratching your head. But honestly, those are the only issues I have with the film. I really enjoyed it, and I guess I have a soft spot for it because it was technically my introduction to Alex Cross growing up. So for those reasons, I'm gonna give it an 8 out of 10. Now, the last film to talk about is the 2012 reboot titled Alex Cross. It was adapted from book number 12 in the Alex Cross series, simply titled Cross. It was directed by Rob Cohen, who everybody knows as the director of the original Fast and Furious film. And it features a star-studded cast including Tyler Perry, Matthew Fox, Edward Barnes, Rachel Nichols, Carmen Ejego, Giancarlo Esposito, and Jean Reno. The reason this reboot exists is because apparently a third Alex Cross film starring Morgan Freeman just couldn't get off the ground. You know, it was meant to be adapted from book number 6, that being Roses Are Red, but according to James Patterson, the actual screenplay that had been written for the film had so little to do with the source material that the only two things from the novel which were in the script were the title and Alex Cross's name. So yeah, that definitely says a lot, and in my opinion, by cancelling it, the studio dodged a bullet. And as for this reboot, most of you probably know by now that it was unsuccessful, receiving negative reviews and practically bombing at the box office. And rightfully so, because in my opinion, this film was absolutely terrible, to the point where you'd be better off just reading the novel. Now, the novel and the film tell two almost entirely different versions of the story. In the novel, Alex comes face to face with the man he believes to be responsible for his first wife's murder, that being the Butcher. But in the film, the Butcher is known as Picasso, and he is committing a series of murders that all share a similar pattern. And of course, Alex sets out to investigate these murders and take Picasso down. The only difference is that in this iteration, his wife Maria Cross is still alive. Now, there were a couple of good things about this film. You know, the majority of the performances were decent. There were tidbits of good cinematography, especially in the opening scene. The score is decent in a few spots. And even though, much like the rest of the film, the ending deviates from the source material, it was a pretty decent twist ending in of itself. But I have to give extra props to Matthew Fox for his incredibly committed performance as Picasso. You know, he underwent extensive training and shed most of his body fat for this role. And if we do see more of him in the future as an actor, I hope he gets to play more villainous roles like this. And this is coming from a huge Lost fan, by the way. However, this movie screwed up pretty much everything else. A lot of elements were changed from the book, probably to make the story more accessible to casual viewers, but instead it just reduced the whole thing to something extremely generic and predictable. Alex Cross's partner, John Sampson, is not even in this film. Instead, Edward Barnes, who plays his partner, is portraying a totally different character. And even Picasso as a villain is very underdeveloped and way more interesting in the book. And as for Tyler Perry, I thought he was woefully miscast as Alex Cross. I get that from an age and physique standpoint, he does bear a stronger resemblance to the character, but he just didn't have the chops to pull it off. And if this was an attempt to turn him into an action star of sorts, then I'm sorry, but this was a huge misfire. There's also a couple of logic issues and implausibilities that require suspension of disbelief, and the worst part of the film is something that should be the best part, and that's the action. You know, there's a big scale sequence around the latter stages of the film that should be enjoyable, but it's ultimately ruined by horrendous CGI. And don't get me started on the hand-to-hand close combat sequences, because they're ruined by terrible shaky cam, frequent jump cuts, lazy slow-mo. Sometimes the camera will be zoomed in too closely on an actor's face during a close-up shot. And going back to the shaky cam, they probably used some kind of enhancement effect in post-production to make it quote-unquote better, but ultimately it just makes it worse. And you can tell all of this is being done to cover up shoddy choreography in some instances. Like, you really have to see it just to believe how bad it is. So yeah, overall, this was easily one of the worst action films I've ever seen, one of Tyler Perry's worst films period, and I never want to see it again. There was potential here, but it all went to waste. And it's a shame with this being directed by Rob Cohen, who has fallen so far compared to his glory days. So for all of those reasons, this is gonna get a 4 out of 10. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the Alex Cross films. As for next time, I'm gonna be reviewing the Amazon Prime series adaptation titled Cross, starring Aldous Hodge in the role of Alex Cross. So look forward to that very soon. Thank you all for watching, guys. Please be sure to like the video, share it, and subscribe. Ring the bell. Take care, and I'll see you soon.